Hey folks, Dust here after the New Year's break to talk about another roster move. And of course, this is Refrezh from Fragsters joining OpTic, which is going to be in place of Nico, who has been benched. And so I'm going to kind of talk about OpTic a little bit and then talk about this roster move and just kind of run through everything, so to speak. You don't know how it goes at this point. So just to kick things off, to focus in on OpTic a little bit as a team, of course, the core of this team, the Danish lineup, has been together since basically May of 2018. That's, of course, after they got rid of Stanislaw and Shazam. They went fully Danish. And really the only change that has taken place besides this one now at Refrezh coming in is, of course, when Gade was removed and Nico came in. Of course, now Nico's out for Refrezh. So they've been through a couple of moves throughout the year. But again, the core of this team has really been together for quite a long time now, many months, to have shown us something. I think one of the key things to kind of say right off the top is when this lineup came together, so much potential on paper when you think about it. I mean, you had Config, who was an absolute monster for North in 2017. One of the best raw entry riflers out there, kind of a secondary entry behind MSL, performed really, really well, put up monster numbers on a couple of occasions at really big tournaments. Definitely a huge superstar level player for them to grab. A lot of people, myself included, were kind of scratching their head that North even let this guy go. So, I mean, he was, of course, a really big piece to have on your team. Then they had Yugi, who looked so sharp on Heroic, looked like a really good up-and-coming opera in the Danish scene. A lot of people were talking about how this guy was going to be the next Device, like he was going to be, kind of the second chair to Device, who, of course, was the clear best opera from Denmark, that this guy was going to do it. This guy had more than Mertz. He was going to be that guy and definitely looked that way coming into this team. Then you had Cajun B, who was going to be going to more of a supportive role. He wasn't going to be a primary AWP anymore. He might do it secondary, but he was going to be able to focus more on rifling, playing the peripheral role positions, getting back to something that he had been really, really good at in the past. And he was maybe even going to be a secondary caller, help pitch in ideas, be a veteran, be that experienced player that can maybe help foster in a youth like Yugi and just be a good component of the team, a good supporting factor, a role player. And then you had Snappy, who was a pretty capable in-game leader for Heroic. I mean, he did some really good things with that team throughout, I guess, mostly mid and late 2016, which we're pretty far removed from that now. But certainly he looked like he had done enough to deserve a chance on a team like OpTic. I mean, if you couldn't have Glaive, if you couldn't, get MSL from North, he really seemed to be like one of those other guys in line because Kerrigan was, of course, off playing international Counter-Strike with FaZe. And, if that hadn't have happened, maybe Kerrigan would have been an option for this team. But Snappy seemed like a good shout, good enough for, the project. And again, there's just so much talent on paper, but this team just never lived up to that. Like, this team, when you looked at the lineup on paper, you would think surely a top 10 team in the world. And maybe they could even, if things go right, make some super deep runs at really big tournaments. And the problem is that this team ultimately has only made deep runs at small, like, tier 2 events and things of that nature. Oftentimes, they have been disappointing. They maybe don't necessarily always get, like, embarrassed, like losing to a team that's just, like, completely trash or something like that. But against teams that you would think, okay, like, this is a respectable opponent, but with your talent on paper, you should still be able to beat them. There's so many occasions where that didn't happen. To kick things off, back in May, they had a pretty good debut at the EPL Season 7 finals. They won some best of threes against NIP and Space Soldiers. They played SK really close. They got a top 8 finish. This was after they had just come together, and they didn't have a whole lot of time practicing. So this was a pretty good result. But then it goes right into disappointment, going out in groups at DreamHack Austin, losing to Rogue in a best of 1 and then Space Soldiers in that best of 3. A little bit of a recovery at DreamHack Summer because they were able to get through the groups. They beat North in the best of 3 in the semifinals, but then they let off the gas pedal big time and lost to Imperial in the grand finals, which was really disappointing. Even if Imperial had a good amount of talent on the team, like Esperano, Nexa, some of these guys who were definitely big firepower players, you would think, surely, come on, you should have won the final. It just seemed like they didn't care. Like, they had almost ran out of steam after beating North. That's what they really cared about. I even kind of heard as much, kind of behind the scenes, that perhaps, they really just wanted to beat North, and after that, they just were deflated. But, man, that is definitely really disappointing. They did good at the minor. I mean, they beat NIP and INTS when they needed to in best of 3s to get the major slot. They did ultimately lose to NIP in a pretty one-sided fashion in the finals of the minor. But again, like, it's one of those instances where they got the main task accomplished, and so anything after that was just going to be icing on the cake, and they just didn't really seem to take it seriously. Then there was about a month break after the minor. And then this is where some really disappointing things start happening for OpTic on the comeback, like that Zotac event they went to. They lose to Ghost in the opening best of 3. And some of those losses, they weren't even competitive. Like, it wasn't even close. I mean, I know Ghost has gone on to be a really good team, definitely top 4 team in North America, has gone toe-to-toe with Navi really well in some series. I mean, they're a pretty good team. Like, Steel's done a really fantastic job with Ghost, but still, you would think that this team with this talent should be able to beat that team, and they didn't. So get knocked out of that right away. They go to DreamHack Masters Stockholm. They go out in groups again. They weren't even competitive against FaZe in that best of 3. And then they lost to Heroic. I mean, this is a team that was supposed to be like number 4 in the pecking order. Like, Astralis is number 1 in Denmark. North and OpTic, you would assume, would kind of scrap for who would be number 2 behind Astralis. But yeah, like, you would think surely they should be able to take care of Heroic, and they don't. Heroic beats them. They get knocked out of the group stages of DreamHack Masters Stockholm. Then, of course, the major doesn't really go well, has some struggles in some of the best of ones, and then they wind up losing the best of 3 the big, so they don't advance through that. Star Ladder and CS Summit 3 are some signs of recovery. Top 4 at Star Ladder Season 6, and they took 2nd at CS Summit 3. At Star Ladder, though, they didn't really beat like too many great opponents other than beating Big in a best of 1 and Mouse Sports in a best of 1. But of course, this Mouse Sports team was a team that was using Snacks and had a lot of struggles with Snacks on the team, to be 100% honest, outside of like maybe New York when they beat Liquid in the finals. But yeah, just, not really too much to claim. They wound up losing to Ints to get eliminated in the semifinals, which Ints, again, a respectable Finnish team, but I already kind of talked about this earlier, where it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, great, you're losing to respectable opponents, but you're not gaining a lot of ground, you're not getting, the trophies, you're not really showing yourself off. Now, at CS Summit 3, I would say this is actually a pretty great tournament for them. The only big loss they really had was the loss to Energy in the finals. I mean, yeah, they lost a big early in the tournament. We got their revenge against them. They beat Complexity in 2 best of 3s. They beat Ghost 2-0, getting some revenge after Zotac. So this is actually a really good run. This was, along with, taking top 4 at Star Ladder, was like, maybe something is finally happening. Maybe they're finally breaking through. But then, of course, they go out in groups at DreamHack Winner, losing to Bravado and losing to Ints. And then when you look at some of their online play, I mean, they did well enough in Mountain Dew League to play in relegation and qualify for EPL, so that's great. Thumbs up there. But then they lost in the Star Ladder Season 7 European qualifiers to Spirit. I probably could just stop there, because that already is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, there's no excuse that you should be losing to that team. It's just really unreal. But on top of that, they didn't do well at all in ECS. They weren't even close to being a playoff contender in that league. They lost to LDLC in that GG Bet Shuffle, like I Am Chicago qualifier, which, granted, LDLC did do really well at that LAN, but that's basically the only thing that team ever did. Now that team's already breaking apart. So that was like pretty much a fluke. So you should have been qualifying over that team. They actually beat Ents earlier on in that qualifier. So what in the world's going on there? Like, I'm not really sure. And then, they lost that New York qualifier to Hellraisers and North. One of those maps, they got 16-0'd. So, I mean, online play outside of qualifying for EPL through, the Mountain Dew League, that not much was there, really. And when you look at it, like, this team had some really big problems. Like, for one, their map pool was really, really poor. I mean, they were good on a couple of maps. Like, I think Inferno, namely, was one of the big ones they were pretty good on. Mirage, they were pretty solid. I think they had one other map they were really good on. Nuke, obviously, would be the one I'm thinking of there. But then there was so many maps that they either just didn't play, like Cash, for instance. They only played like once. That was usually kind of the map they went towards banning wise. But yeah, their train wasn't really that good. A slightly negative win rate on that map. Their overpass was really bad. Their Dust 2 was really bad. So I mean, they didn't really have a map pool. They only had like 3 maps they could consistently play pretty well. Then train was like super hit or miss. Even their Mirage wasn't like a clear cut strength. I mean, they won it more than they lost it, sure, but it wasn't like overwhelming in the positive. And then, like I said, you had Cash that just didn't really play. And then you had 2 other maps that they were just tanking. So you can't have a map pool that shallow and expect to be competitive on a top international level. On top of that, some of the star players in this team just absolutely faded away. I don't know what the hell happened to these guys. I mean, part of it could be Snappy's leadership style. Maybe these players didn't mesh with it, though in the case of Yugi, I'm not sure why that would be the case, since guess what? When Yugi was looking really hot on Heroic, Snappy was his in-game leader. But in the case of Config, this guy was a monster. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. When he was playing on North, he had some really big tournaments. He looked like a superstar entry player. I mean, look back into 2017 when he played for North at that EPL Season 5 finals where they took second, or DreamHack Masters Malmo where they took second. Dude was dropping like plus 50, plus 60, just putting up monster numbers. Had so many events where he go like plus 25 or better. Just, the numbers were insane statistically when he played for North and when he was that star level player in 2017. OpTic had started out strong in that EPL Season 7 finals, that, that debut event where they took top 8, beating NIP in a best of 3. But from that point forward, he just looks like a shell of himself. He doesn't look anything like he used to. I mean, he would still have events where he goes positive. It's not like he's always going like minus, but a lot of these events he's like +5, +4, +6. A couple events where he does go into the red. And I know that this is a little bit of a shallow statistical analysis, but I mean, the difference is staggering from that shallow statistical analysis, and you can just tell that he's just not playing at the same level. And I mean, some of it could just be, again, he's used to MSL, a more structured in-game leader, a guy who has a lot of set tactics, a guy who has all these set protocols, who is really rigid in his system. But I mean, I've heard that Snappy usually demands a lot of discipline from his players, from people who have played with him on Heroic, so I'm not sure what the difference is there. I mean, it seemed like a lot of OpTic's initial setups were fine, but things would just kind of break down. You know, the most recent demos I watched from them, I'll be honest, I didn't really watch their DreamHack Winter games, and I didn't watch that much of their CS Summit matches, but when I watched like their Starlighter Season 6 matches, which is one of the events that they played pretty recently, they did look really sloppy in the mid to late round. Things would really break down. I mean, they had like good initial setups on their defaults, maybe some, you know, decent enough set tactics, but things would just really break around in the mid to late round. And maybe that was a part of why Config struggled. I know the one time I watched them play Cash, they had Config lurking B. That was really weird, like having him play a peripheral. Granted, that was only like one game, the only game on Cash they ever played offline, but there were little things like that that maybe could have caused him to be off, but some of it could just be him as well. Like, it's really hard to know how much blame I should pin on Config the individual or how much I should blame it on the leadership structure of the team. But either way, the fact that he slipped off so much is a huge problem. And the fact that Yugi basically is the same freaking story, man. I mean, he looked so strong in the first few events with OpTic. Like, that EPL Season 7 finals, the same one that Config was popping off, so was he. Some of the main reasons why that team was able to do so well at that event. This guy even continued to play well through Austin and Summer, where they had some struggles. He played really well at the minor to get them to the major. But then that moment forward, I mean, these events, by the way, he was like +30, +40, looking super strong. From that point forward, I don't know what the hell happened to him. I mean, he played pretty good at this last event they played in relegation, but he wasn't really playing against any type of big competition. But there's like, you know, a solid 6 to 7 event stretch where he's just like not looking impactful whatsoever, having way more off games than good games, going negative overall for an event on like 4 different occasions. Again, I don't know how this is possible. Same in-game leader you had on Heroic when you were like getting monster numbers and building yourself up to be this, you know, player with a ton of potential, be that next young star coming up from Denmark, to now, I don't know what's happened. People have even tried to ask me, like, you know, what do you think's wrong? I have no idea. Like, this is a mystery to me. I'm not sure how this has happened. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make now, you know, you combine the fact that Config's having a lot of struggles, Yugi's having a lot of struggles, maybe some issues with the leadership of the team because they look sloppy a lot of the time in mid to late round situations. The map pool is really shallow. That doesn't look really good. It doesn't seem like they have a lot of dependable maps, like only a handful. If one of them gets banned, you only maybe get to play one of them in a best of 3 series. And then, you know, if you get stuck playing like an Overpass or a Dust 2 since you're banning Cash and you're really not doing well in those 2 maps at all, you really have an uphill battle in best of 3 pick ban situations. So all those things are against OpTic right now. What's the solution? Let's bring in Refrezh. It doesn't seem like it's going to be enough, but let's just talk about Refrezh and why it's at least going to help a little bit. So for a while now, I feel like OpTic with this 5th spot, formerly Gade, formerly Nico, now going to be Refrezh, I feel like these players just didn't get used right, or they weren't the right player for the role. Because I feel like what usually happens is in the past, Snappy likes to kind of be a part of the entry pack. It likes to be him and then his entry fragger. So back on Heroic, this used to be him and Nico. But in theory, on OpTic, it was going to be him and Config. And then you would have, you know, Cage and B kind of playing a solo role, kind of the edge of the map player, peripheral player, obviously Yugi's the AWP player. And then typically the 5th player would kind of play that other spot. Like not really a pure entry spot, but like the other side of the map that Cage and B wasn't playing on. So this started out to be Gade, then it was Nico, and now it's going to be Refrezh, maybe, unless they structure the team a little bit differently. And don't get me wrong, there were some times where it seemed like they did drift Config over one way to allow Nico to entry a little bit more. But still, like, these players were not put in positions to thrive that suited them. I think this is one of the downfalls of the team, is that either they didn't recruit properly or they didn't utilize the players they had properly. Because, like, Gade, I think, is much more impactful on North now, kind of entry fragging with Kirby and Cadian, while, you know, like Valda and AZ are kind of playing the edges of the map. It feels like he's in a role that suits him more. He's still not, like, popping off like crazy, but he does look a little bit better, looks a little bit more impactful. Seems like he is now in a role on North where maybe he can thrive a little bit better than he was on OpTic. Nico did look like a promising player on Heroic when he was like an entry fragger with Snappy, but then you bring him onto this team, you already have Config and Snappy, so it just seemed like it wasn't going to fit. Like there was always going to be someone maybe playing a little bit out of position, whether it was Nico having to play spots he hadn't had to play before, or whether it was, maybe moving Config around to kind of make some space for Nico. It just seemed like it wasn't going to work out very well. Now, someone like Refrezh likes to play those solo spots. He is a guy that will like play solo stairs on overpass while someone plays solo B and the other three are taking bathrooms control. He is the guy that'll play outside of the A-bomb side on Mirage while the rest of your guys are maybe focused on taking mid control and someone else is kind of playing in the B apartments or something like that. He is very much a guy, like he plays Wikidor on Cash as well. This is a bad example because OpTic doesn't really play Cash, but again, he's a guy that likes to play the edge of the map. But, he's also really flexible. Starting off when I watched him with Fragsters early in the year, like at BetsNet Masters and some of the smaller DreamHack Open events that Fragsters were playing at when they were starting to build up a name for themselves because they were getting some pretty cool results at some of these events, he did seem much more like a guy who would kind of play these edge of the map roles and then kind of hang back and be more of a cleanup, mid to late round player, not really involved in the early action, taking a bomb site, much more of a passive rifler, which in theory would be perfect for a team like OpTic if you're going to keep having Snappy and Config being kind of an entry duo, and then, having Yugi continue to op and Cage and B continue to be one of the edge of the map players, and this would be perfect. Like Refrezh role-wise would fit much better into that system than someone like Gate or someone like Nico did. But lately, when I was watching some Fragsters demos, I noticed that Refrezh would at times in some of Fragsters set pieces actually be one of the guys going in with like Stound and Dragonfly and actually being a little bit more active in early round situations, being a little bit more involved in entry work. I think that flexibility is going to be great on him being on OpTic in this configuration. And then in the future, when they want to recruit, they can move Refrezh around a little bit, and that'll make it easier for them to maybe bring in other people. So I think that this quality of Refrezh is really good. The fact that he already likes to play solo roles on the map, which will fit better for how OpTic probably wants to set up. And then again, for the future, he's going to be able to be flexible and move around. And within a round, if you lose a player who's like really key on getting you openings, Refrezh can maybe slot into that set piece and kind of help fulfill that still a little bit. So yeah, I think Refrezh is a pretty good player. Obviously very young, obviously very inexperienced. Got some experience at Factors, obviously, but still not at the same level as some of these other players on the team who've been doing it for years. I'll also say his numbers weren't like crazy impressive, by the way, on Fragsters. I think people sometimes kind of over-romanticize him a little bit. I mean, he was definitely their most stable player. I think Stound was a little bit more flashy, but I think Refrezh was a little bit more stable. Like, he was kind of your rock player. Like, always will usually frag in the mid to high teens, go slightly positive. He's not going to be like a carry level player, but he can definitely do his job. He's definitely flexible. He definitely is a little bit more consistent. I think that he definitely was the better pickup for OpTic, given the position they might want to use him for and given the fact that, again, he just seemed a little bit more stable. But again, I mean, the question does just rise. Is this really going to be enough for OpTic to turn the corner, making this move? It might help set up the roles a little bit better. People might be a little bit more comfortable in positions they're playing now, but it still doesn't help their map pool. It still doesn't help some of the sloppiness in the mid to late round situation. It still doesn't help the fact that Config and Yugi have been struggling. So those are still some major red flags that OpTic must address if they're ever going to really be truly competitive on the international level. More moves may have to happen. I mean, one obvious one is maybe you got to change the leadership. I mean, everyone keeps talking about maybe Kerrigan should be the guy to come in to lead the team. That's definitely a possibility, especially since MSL has gone the rogue and, that's the only other really Danish in-game leading option you have other than like Hunden or something like that. So yeah, that would probably be the next natural thing to try to do. But then after that, you have to start wondering to yourself, well, shit, man, like, is Yugi and Config just people who aren't going to be able to perform anymore on this team? Do they need something else to perform? They're going to have to go the other way. And at that point, you're talking about bringing in other young Danish star players hoping for the best, like Astound. Or maybe you try to snag someone from North or Heroic if you can. Maybe you have to go international and look in even other directions. I don't really know the answers. I don't think this is enough to save OpTic, but I think it should certainly help. That's kind of the way I look at the move. I think it's a good move for OpTic in the short and long term, but it just seems like there's way more problems than this to be able to salvage the team and make them live up to the standards that you would expect when you see the lineup on paper. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. I mean, there's probably a little bit more I could talk about here, but this video is already kind of getting long. I don't want to make this last forever. I think I've hit some pretty good points I wanted to hit. Maybe left out a couple I wanted to hit, and I'll remember after I finish recording the video, and I'll kind of kick myself. But maybe I'll say something in the comments on Reddit or, whatever, to kind of address it if I need to. But anyway, just want to talk about this move, break it down a little bit. Hope you guys enjoyed the content. If you did, please follow and subscribe for more. Thanks so much. Catch you next time.